In a world where desperate pleas echo through emergency lines, a seasoned dispatcher uncovers a pattern of fatal oversights in 3 intertwined crises, each revealing the razor-thin line between salvation and silence when systems falter at the brink. Grappling with the haunting weight of unheard voices, she transforms personal guilt into relentless advocacy, exposing institutional cracks that nearly claim innocent lives. Ultimately, her quest for accountability sparks sweeping reforms, turning tragedy into a beacon of hope for future callers teetering on the edge of oblivion. Silent screams. The receiver trembled in Euphémie Beaumont's grasp as the line crackled with a final, guttural gasp before plunging into void, her fingers, calloused from years of frantic keystrokes, frozen mid-dial on the glowing screen that mocked her with its impersonal urgency, while shadows of bureaucratic red tape loomed like executioners in the dim dispatch center. This moment, where a life slipped away despite every protocol screamed into the ether, crystallized the nightmare that had haunted her through countless shifts, help dispatched, yet fatally delayed by the very machine designed to save. If this harrowing disconnect has chilled your core, subscribe now. Echoes of redemption await that will redefine the fragile thread of survival. Yet this instant was merely the culmination of a torment that had built across 3 shattering cases, each a testament to the cruel irony of proximity without rescue, where Euphémie's unyielding empathy clashed against a system riddled with fatal inertia. Born to a lineage of Scottish resilience in the misty Highlands, now anchored in a bustling French coastal town, she had become the unseen guardian of crises, the voice that calmed storms, the hand that summoned aid, dissolving into the background once the sirens faded. But beneath her composed facade lay a keen resolve, sharpened by nights replaying garbled pleas, piecing together the human cost of overlooked details. Now, as the silence reverberated, Euphémie channeled that hidden arsenal, her tone resolute amid the chaos. "We failed them," she whispered to the empty room, "but we won't fail again. The key to mending this lies in exposing the fractures before more voices fade forever." The fluorescent hum of the dispatch center in the coastal town of St. Malo filled the air like a perpetual low tide, casting sterile light over banks of screens that flickered with incoming alerts. Euphémie Beaumont settled into her swivel chair for the graveyard shift, the kind where exhaustion blurred the edges of urgency, her headset already warm from the previous operator's lingering heat. At 45, her features, high cheekbones framed by salt and pepper waves pulled into a practical knot, eyes a deep Atlantic gray that held storms unspoken, carried the quiet authority of someone who had whispered calm into chaos for 2 decades. Born to a Scottish fishing family who had crossed the channel for better fortunes, she had learned early that survival often hinged on a single, clear voice cutting through the roar. She adjusted her microphone, fingers tracing the worn keys of her console, each one a gateway to lives teetering on the brink. The center was a hive of controlled frenzy, colleagues murmuring into headsets, maps pulsing with digital pins, the faint scent of stale coffee mingling with the ozone tang of electronics. Euphémie had chosen this path after losing her brother to a boating mishap where help arrived too late, a wound that drove her to become the invisible lifeline, the one who bridged desperation with action. Tonight felt ordinary at first. A domestic disturbance in the old quarter, resolved with a welfare check. Then a minor fender bender on the coastal road, ambulances en route. But as midnight crept closer, the line lit up with something different, a faint, garbled plea from a teenage boy trapped in his family's carriage during a school event. His voice cracked through static, muffled words about being pinned, pain radiating from his chest, the location a crowded lot near the academy. Euphémie's pulse quickened. She leaned forward, her gray eyes narrowing on the screen as she typed coordinates, dispatching units with precise calm. "Stay with me," she urged, her Scottish lilt softened by years in France. "Help is coming, describe your surroundings again." But the connection faltered, his responses fading into labored breaths, the mystery deepening. Was it a prank or something far worse? Officers arrived swiftly, their reports crackling back. Lot patrolled, no one in visible distress. Yet Euphémie's instincts screamed otherwise, the boy's details too specific, his fear too raw. She replayed the call in her mind, noting the vehicle description buried in the static, wondering if it had been relayed properly. As the line went silent, a chill settled. This wasn't isolated. Whispers from colleagues hinted at similar glitches, calls where aid hovered close but missed the mark. Euphémie stared at her console, the seed of doubt taking root. What if the system she trusted was fraying at the seams? What echoes of desperation have you encountered that lingered long after silence fell? Share in the comments, what would you do if the lifeline you held slipped through unseen cracks? Dawn filtered through the dispatch center's narrow windows, turning the night shift fluorescence pale and sickly by comparison. Euphémie finished her final report with the same meticulous care she gave every call, fingers stiff, eyes gritty, mind still half-anchored to voices that refused to fade. When she removed her headset, the pressure it had carved into her temple throbbed dully, a physical reminder of the hours spent holding other people's panic together with calm words and protocol codes. Bonne journée, a colleague murmured in passing. Euphémie answered with a polite nod, the practiced smile that never quite reached her eyes. Outside, the morning air smelled of salt and damp stone. She drove the familiar coastal road home, the Atlantic stretched wide and steel-gray to her right, waves battering the Breton cliffs with the same persistence she'd heard in countless emergency calls. The sea was honest, at least. It never pretended to be gentle. Her cottage sat alone at the cliff's edge, modest and weather-beaten, ivy clawing at its stone walls. Inside, silence greeted her, thick and intimate. She set her bag down, filled the kettle, and leaned against the counter while it heated, shoulders sagging as the adrenaline finally drained from her system. These rituals were her armor. Tea. Breath. Stillness. Family photographs lined the narrow shelves. Her Scottish ancestors stared out in stern sepia, men with hard eyes and women with backs straight as spines of law. Survivors. Keepers of duty. She sometimes wondered what they would make of her work, listening rather than acting, saving lives with words and timing instead of ropes and blades. Outside, she clipped a few sprigs of rosemary from her small herb garden, the scent sharp and grounding. It reminded her of childhood visits to the moors, of her brother laughing into the wind, daring the weather to best him. The memory tightened her chest. His face rose unbidden, younger than she was now, eyes bright with the thrill of the sea. The night he died replayed itself in fragments, radio static, shouted coordinates, the delay that felt insignificant to officials but fatal in reality. She had been a junior operator then, told to wait, to trust the chain of command. By the time the Coast Guard boat launched, the storm had already decided the outcome. His final transmission still lived in her dreams, distorted but unmistakable. That moment had forged her into what she was now, relentless, controlled, tireless. But it had also planted a seed of guilt she had never uprooted. What if she had pushed harder? What if she had broken protocol? Those questions had shaped everything that followed, including what she kept hidden. Her marriage had not survived the weight of those silences. A fisherman understood the sea, but not the way it haunted her. Long nights, missed dinners, her habit of retreating inward after every shift, it all eroded them slowly, like water against rock. Their daughter, bright and sharp, now lived in Paris, chasing a life unburdened by sirens and storms. Their calls were loving but careful, words chosen to avoid the tender places. "You save everyone but yourself, Maman," her daughter had said once, half joking, half accusation. The words lingered now as Euphémie opened her laptop at the kitchen table. Steam curled from her tea as she reviewed call logs from the previous week, something she rarely did off-duty. Patterns leapt out with unsettling clarity. An elderly woman whose fire alert had been downgraded because confirmation took too long. A domestic dispute flagged multiple times before finally erupting into violence. Delays. Deferrals. Decisions made by people far removed from the urgency of fear. Her pulse quickened. This wasn't coincidence. It was systemic. Each case mirrored her brother's fate, the same invisible hand slowing responses, the same comfort with risk because consequences belonged to someone else. The realization chilled her more than any storm call ever had. If she stayed silent, she was complicit. If she spoke up, she risked everything she'd built. Her gray eyes lifted to the window, where sunlight spilled over the garden, casting long shadows across the herbs and stone path. She felt the familiar fear rise, the instinct to endure quietly, to do her job and nothing more. But empathy pressed harder. She could almost hear the callers again, the hitch in their breathing, the trust they placed in a system they believed would not fail them. Euphémie reached for her phone. The number she dialed was not one she used lightly. The woman on the oversight board had once been a mentor, someone who understood both the rules and their cost. When the call connected, Euphémie kept her voice steady, professional. "We need to look closer," she said. "Something's breaking." There was a pause on the other end. Not dismissal. Not surprise. Recognition. As the conversation ended, Euphémie felt something shift inside her, subtle but irreversible. This wasn't heroism. It was necessity. A bridge she had avoided crossing for years now lay firmly beneath her feet. Outside, the wind stirred the rosemary, carrying its scent through the open window. For the first time in a long while, the memories that haunted her did not feel like chains. They felt like fuel. The day had only just begun, and already, Euphémie knew her life was moving toward a reckoning she could no longer postpone. The afternoon sun slanted through the dispatch center's blinds, casting long, narrow bars of light across the linoleum floor. They fell in rigid lines, stark and unyielding, and for reasons she couldn't quite articulate, they reminded Euphémie of prison gates. She sat very still at her console, spine straight, jaw tight, as if any movement might fracture the fragile control she had maintained since dawn. She had barely slept. The boy's voice haunted her, distorted by static and fear, replaying in relentless loops behind her eyes. Too fast. Too breathless. Words tumbling over one another until they dissolved into panic. She had followed protocol. She always did. But the sense that she had arrived a heartbeat too late gnawed at her, raw and persistent. Her console buzzed. The sound snapped her upright, adrenaline surging before thought could catch up. She adjusted her headset, fingers hovering over the keyboard as the call connected. A woman's voice came through, low and shaking, as if she were speaking from behind a locked door. "He's getting worse," the caller whispered. "He watches everything I do. The children, please, I don't know what to do." Euphémie's training took over, her voice calm, measured, an anchor thrown into turbulent water. "Ma'am, stay on the line with me. You're doing the right thing. Help is en route." As she guided the woman through questions, details surfaced like bruises beneath thin skin. Previous reports. Minor injuries dismissed as accidents. Neighbors' concerns logged and filed away. Warnings softened by phrasing, urgency diluted by bureaucracy. Each revelation landed with a sickening familiarity. Her chest tightened. This wasn't an isolated incident. It was a pattern. One she had already seen too many times. The woman faltered, breath hitching. I started writing things down, she murmured. Dates. Things he said. Things he did. I was afraid no one would believe me. Euphémie stilled. A digital log. Evidence created quietly, desperately, in the absence of trust. The similarity to her own private notes, late-night scribbles, highlighted reports, questions she hadn't yet dared to ask, sent a jolt through her. It wasn't romance in any conventional sense, but there was intimacy in that recognition. Two strangers bound by fear and foresight, each refusing to let silence erase their truth. Hold on to that, Euphémie said softly. It matters. She patched in her supervisor, then another. Her voice sharpened, authority threading through every word. This case aligns with previous oversights. We can't treat this as routine. I'm requesting immediate escalation. There was resistance, the familiar tightening of tone on the other end. Procedure. Resources. Wait and see. No, Euphémie said, firmer now. We've already waited. And we've already seen what happens when we do. A pause followed. Not compliance yet, but consideration. Minutes stretched thin as responders arrived on scene. Euphémie stayed on the line, guiding, listening, her heart pounding in rhythm with the ticking clock on her screen. Then came the update. The house was silent. No sign of forced entry. No voices. No movement. The family was gone. The words landed like a physical blow. Euphémie removed her headset slowly, as if detaching herself from the moment might soften it. Around her, the dispatch center hummed with other calls, other emergencies, life continuing with brutal indifference. This was the moment everything crystallized. The fear she had carried for years, the fear of pushing too hard, of being labeled difficult, of losing her position, fell away, eclipsed by something heavier and clearer. If she did nothing, this would happen again. And again. And again. She opened her drawer and began pulling files, her movements precise, deliberate. Logs. Incident reports. Notes she had kept hidden in plain sight. Her gray eyes hardened, reflecting not exhaustion now, but resolve. As the line finally disconnected, leaving only the dull hum of static, Euphémie whispered into the empty space, I won't let this break us. The system loomed before her, vast and flawed, but so did her determination. This was no longer about guilt or atonement. It was about choice. And she had made hers. Tension coiled tight in the dispatch center, a living thing that seemed to pulse in time with the blinking lights of incoming calls. For Euphémie, days and nights blurred into one long vigil. Shifts overlapped, sleep shortened, and meals became an afterthought as she sank deeper into the records no one was meant to linger over. She pored over transcripts with forensic focus, highlighting phrases, circling timestamps, annotating margins until the pages resembled battle maps. A teenager's frantic plea dissolved into static at a critical moment. An elderly man's fire alert stalled because a relay flagged a false positive. A family's repeated warnings about escalating threats buried beneath polite phrasing and procedural delay. Each case alone could be explained away. Together, they formed something darker. The obstacles came swiftly. Equipment malfunctions were cited first, waved like shields. Then staffing shortages. Then the quiet pressure from above, questions framed as concern but edged with warning. Do you really want to pursue this? Think about the implications. We can't afford panic. Euphémie recognized the tactic. Red herrings, carefully placed to exhaust and distract. She catalogued them too. What sustained her was the unexpected deepening of alliances. The investigator from the oversight board, sharp-eyed, methodical, and refreshingly unsentimental, became a constant presence. They met after hours at a small cliffside cafe where the sea wind rattled the windows and the smell of salt mixed with burnt espresso. There, amid cluttered notebooks and shared silences, frustration slowly transformed into momentum. "These aren't accidents," he said one night, tapping a page where timelines converged too neatly to ignore. His voice was low, certain. Their hands brushed as he reached for her pen, a fleeting contact that sent a quiet jolt through her. Not distraction, recognition. A shared belief that truth mattered, even when inconvenient. In that moment, the exhaustion lifted just enough to let hope breathe. Back at the center, frustration peaked during a simulated emergency drill meant to showcase preparedness. Instead, it exposed fractures she had been warning about for weeks: delayed routing, miscommunication between units, confusion over authority. Watching it unravel felt like witnessing prophecy fulfilled. Anger flared hot and sharp, but beneath it, validation. Small victories followed. A colleague lingered after a shift, voice hushed, eyes downcast. He admitted he had flagged inconsistencies months earlier but never escalated them, afraid of repercussions. His confession didn't erase the damage, but it mattered. It meant the silence was cracking. Euphémie felt everything more keenly now. The sea breeze drifting through an open window carried both calm and urgency. The bitter taste of overbrewed coffee grounded her during long nights of review. The storm clouds gathering offshore mirrored the pressure building inside her, reflected in her gray eyes whenever she caught her own gaze in darkened glass. As alliances solidified and false leads fell away, the true shape of the problem emerged, not malice, but inertia. A system built to avoid blame rather than protect lives. It was daunting. It was dangerous. But she was no longer alone. And in the quiet moments, between files, between calls, she allowed herself to imagine a future where her fight reshaped not just policy, but her own life. Where connection didn't have to be sacrificed for duty. The storm outside intensified, waves hammering the cliffs, yet inside her, something steadier had taken root. The question was no longer whether she would unravel the threads. Only how far she was willing to go. The revelation struck with a force that stole Euphémie's breath. In the archive room, the air was stale and cold, thick with years of neglect. Shelves groaned under the weight of forgotten binders as her flashlight swept across stamped folders marked confidential. Dust rose with every movement, clinging to her skin, but she barely noticed. Her pulse thundered louder than the hum of the aging lights. There it was. Report after report pointed to the same rot beneath the surface. A flawed dispatch software update quietly rolled out and never properly tested. Training modules left unchanged for years despite documented failures. Human errors that should have been caught, amplified instead by silence and speed. These were not coincidences. They were patterns, repeated and ignored. Her hands trembled as she flipped the final page. Everything she believed until now cracked open. This was not a broken system struggling to keep up. This was a system choosing not to look too closely. Footsteps echoed. She turned just as a familiar figure stepped into the doorway. A supervisor she once admired. Trusted. The look on his face told her the truth before he spoke. "We knew," he said quietly. Raising it would have caused panic. Funding cuts. Investigations. The words burned. "How many warnings did you bury?" Euphémie demanded, her voice sharp, shaking. "How many calls were dismissed because it was easier?" Silence answered her. The betrayal hit harder than fear. She had defended this place, given it everything. Now it stared back at her, hollow. When she walked out, her badge felt heavier, like it might drag her under. Later, by the sea, the wind cut through her jacket as she finally let the weight show. Her ally listened without interrupting, eyes steady as she spoke through clenched teeth. When her voice broke, he pulled her into a brief, grounding embrace. No promises. Just presence. It was enough. By morning, the stakes were clear. Expose the truth and risk demotion, isolation, maybe worse. Stay silent and become complicit. Euphémie stared out at the gray horizon, resolve hardening. Fear still lingered, but it no longer ruled her. If the system refused to change, she would force it to look at itself. No matter the cost. Despair engulfed Euphémie as inquiries stalled, the walls of bureaucracy closing in like iron gates, each decision delayed or deflected. Superiors stonewalled at every turn, their indifference a cold mirror of her own growing doubts. Evidence that had once seemed tangible slipped through her fingers, vanishing like mist, leaving behind only fragments and unanswered questions. Isolation wrapped around her like a wet cloak, heavy and suffocating, in the storm-lashed center where the wind shrieked against the stone walls and rain hammered the roof with relentless insistence. She confronted the old, gnawing fears she had tried to bury. Guilt over her brother's loss resurfaced with cruel insistence, clawing at the corners of her mind, whispering that her efforts were meaningless, that her persistence only prolonged her pain. Hopelessness draped over her like a shadow, a quiet voice suggesting that the world she fought for would never bend, that change was a cruel illusion. The darkest hour came on a live call meant to clarify crucial points, a mirror of past failures. Her voice, usually measured and strong, cracked under the weight of frustration and anticipation. Each delayed response from the other side felt like a personal indictment, every silence a hammering of her own inadequacy. Desperation clawed at her composure, and for a moment, she feared that she might fracture completely, that the walls she had built around her resilience were splintering. Later, in the solitude of her cliffside cottage, the storm outside seemed to echo the turmoil within. Waves pounded the rocks far below, throwing spray high enough to wet the windows, their rhythm both hypnotic and menacing. Euphémie paced the narrow rooms, torn between surrender and stubborn perseverance. Her thoughts circled endlessly, questioning whether each action, each plea, each painstaking attempt to uncover truth only amplified the silence, leaving her more alone, more unheard. Sleepless nights stretched endlessly, her mind replaying every misstep, every unreturned message, every fleeting opportunity she had let slip. Shadows of doubt twisted through her consciousness, whispering of futility and failure. The abyss yawned wider with each passing hour, threatening to consume her resolve entirely. And yet, despite the pull of despair, a stubborn ember remained, a fragile, flickering light of determination. It was this ember that she clutched, unwilling to let it die, even as the storm outside and within threatened to tear everything away. Euphémie knew the path forward was treacherous, lined with invisible traps and unsympathetic obstacles. Yet she also knew, deep down, that surrender would not silence the storm, it would simply let it destroy everything she had fought to protect. And so, with trembling hands and a heart weighted by both fear and hope, she prepared to face another day, another call, another silence, knowing that the fight itself, however lonely, was all she had left to hold on to. From the depths of despair, Euphémie felt a shift, subtle at first, like the first pale light brushing the edge of the storm-lashed cliffs. The pounding waves below her cottage, which had seemed menacing only hours before, now carried a rhythm that resonated with something deeper within her, a heartbeat, steady and insistent, that refused to be silenced. As she stared into the rolling gray waters, a clarity she had long avoided began to form. The system that had suffocated her, that had swallowed evidence and ignored pleas, was not an unbreakable monolith. Its flaws, though formidable, were not eternal. And she realized, with both fear and exhilaration, that change would not come from her alone. Heroism was not a solitary endeavor, justice required unity, action forged from shared conviction. The realization was liberating. For the first time in days, she allowed herself to breathe fully, feeling the storm outside echo the storm inside her, and understanding that storms could pass, leaving the world washed clean. She knew she needed allies, not only in the cold corridors of power but in the hearts of those who believed, truly, that right should prevail. With trembling hands, she drafted messages she had postponed for weeks, reaching out to those she trusted. And soon, two familiar presences arrived, her daughter, eyes sharp and inquisitive despite her youth, and her ally, whose steady gaze had often reminded her that she was not alone in this struggle. Their reunion was quiet at first, a gentle collision of relief and tension. Her daughter's small hand found hers, gripping with the silent strength of trust, and in that grasp Euphémie felt the anchor she had almost forgotten she possessed. Her ally, pragmatic yet unwavering, brought news that stitched together the threads of hope and opportunity. The system's flaws were evident to them too, but what mattered now was leverage. The right pieces of evidence presented to the right audience could catalyze change. Together, they pored over the documents, photographs, and recordings that Euphémie had salvaged, piecing together the story that the bureaucracy had tried so hard to bury. Each discovery was a spark in the darkness, inconsistencies in reports, traces of interference, silenced whistleblowers, and the threads of accountability that had been obscured by red tape. With each revelation, her resolve strengthened. The hopelessness that had once threatened to drown her now transformed into something fierce, purposeful, a quiet defiance that pulsed in her veins. Night fell, heavy and velvet over the cliffs, and Euphémie stood at the window, gazing out at the relentless sea. The wind whipped her hair across her face, salt spraying against the panes, but she welcomed it, feeling the storm as if it were a mirror of her renewed determination. She realized that the risk was inevitable. The moment of decision had approached, and there would be no retreat. To expose the truth publicly, to confront the system and demand accountability, would mean putting herself in the line of fire. The threat of retaliation, of professional ruin, even personal danger, loomed like jagged rocks beneath the waves, but she knew that the alternative was complicity, a silent surrender that would haunt her for the rest of her life. Her daughter watched her quietly, the understanding in those young eyes speaking volumes. Euphémie drew her close, feeling the warmth and trust that had sustained her through darker nights. "This isn't just about me," she whispered, her voice low but steady. "It's about making sure that what happened doesn't happen again. We have to be brave, together." Her ally nodded, reviewing their plan with meticulous care. "The leak has to be strategic," he said. "It can't be reckless. We have to ensure that the evidence reaches people who can act on it, reformers who have the authority and influence to force change. One misstep and it could all be lost, or worse, used against us." Euphémie felt the weight of their words but met them with a newfound steadiness. The fear that had clawed at her moments ago was still present, but it no longer ruled her. She drew a deep breath, letting the cold air fill her lungs, and felt the courage coiling within her like a living thing, raw and indomitable. The choice she had to make was irreversible, yes, but it was hers, and the conviction behind it was absolute. Over the following hours, they worked in tense synchrony, mapping the flow of information, encrypting sensitive documents, and identifying trustworthy reformers who could act without alerting those who would seek to suppress the revelations. The storm outside persisted, a fierce companion to the storm within Euphémie. Lightning forked across the sky, illuminating the cliffside in stark, white light, and for a fleeting moment, she imagined herself standing at the edge, daring the abyss below to swallow her. But the fear that had once threatened to paralyze her now became fuel, a reminder of the stakes, of the necessity of courage in the face of overwhelming odds. When the plan was finally set, a strange calm settled over her. The tension had not vanished, but it had crystallized into purpose. Her gray eyes, once haunted by helplessness, now burned with clarity and determination. She was ready. There would be no turning back. The documents would be delivered, the evidence revealed, and the public confronted with the truths that had been hidden for far too long. And yet, even as she prepared, doubts flickered in her mind, natural, inevitable, but she refused to indulge them. She reminded herself of her brother, of the lives that had been affected, of the countless people who had been silenced by the same system. Her courage was not born of recklessness, it was forged from loss, from injustice, and from an unwavering belief that right could prevail if one refused to be crushed by fear. The night stretched on, and the wind carried the scent of rain and salt, mingling with the sharp tang of anticipation. Euphémie paced briefly, then sat at her desk, hands poised over the keyboard, the final step looming like a precipice. She glanced at her daughter, who had fallen asleep on the worn couch, exhausted from the long day but safe. She turned to her ally, who gave a subtle nod, the quiet affirmation of shared resolve. With deliberate care, Euphémie began the process. Each click, each keystroke, sent her heart racing, but also steadying. The files, painstakingly gathered and preserved, were dispatched to trusted reformers, encrypted and verified, each piece a testament to her resolve. And as the final transmission was sent, a strange exhilaration coursed through her, a mingling of fear, relief, and defiance. She leaned back, eyes closing briefly, feeling the weight of the storm outside and within gradually ease. The moment had arrived. The choice had been made. And though she could not know what tomorrow would bring, retaliation, triumph, or further trials, she understood, in the depths of her being, that she had crossed a threshold. Courage was no longer a possibility, it was action. Defiance was no longer silent, it was declared. And for the first time in what felt like an eternity, Euphémie felt the rush of hope, ignited by her own audacity, burning brighter than any fear the world could muster. Her gray eyes, reflective and unyielding, turned toward the storm-lit horizon. She was ready. The tide had turned. The hearing room was charged with a weight that pressed against every chest. Fluorescent lights flickered faintly overhead, lending a sterile pallor to the polished wooden panels and the rows of officials seated like a tribunal of fate. Papers shuffled, murmurs rose and fell, and the occasional tap of a pen punctuated the silence with nervous rhythm. Every gaze in the room seemed to sharpen as Euphémie entered, her gray eyes steady, her shoulders squared despite the tremor of anticipation running through her veins. She had rehearsed this moment countless times, walking through arguments, predicting objections, imagining the defense, the denial, the diversion. But rehearsal had never captured the electric tension in the air, the mixture of fear, authority, and suppressed truths that seemed to swirl like storm clouds above the officials' heads. This was no longer about her alone, it was about every life affected by the inertia of a system too rigid, too proud, too blind. Clearing her throat, she began. Her voice, strong and clear, cut through the murmurs, carrying with it the weight of weeks of painstaking work, sleepless nights, and near insurmountable obstacles. "Ladies and gentlemen," she said, letting her gaze sweep across the room, "I stand before you not as an accuser, but as a witness to a pattern, a repeated failure that has cost lives, silenced warnings, and allowed negligence to masquerade as protocol." Her hands moved to the files neatly arranged on the table before her. She opened the first, revealing photographs, reports, and transcripts that had survived bureaucratic erasure. One by one, she laid them out with deliberate care, each document a thread in the tapestry of evidence she had spent months assembling. The officials shifted in their seats, some frowning, others exchanging subtle glances, the room a chamber of suppressed recognition. The protocols, Euphémie continued, her voice unwavering, were not merely flawed, they were systematically designed to prevent accountability. Warnings from the field were ignored. Alerts from whistleblowers were silenced. Decisions were delayed or redirected, leaving the vulnerable exposed. And while the machinery of administration hummed along, human lives were lost to inertia. A murmur rippled across the room. One official leaned forward, fingers steepled. "These are serious allegations, Ms. Euphémie. Do you have corroborating testimony?" She nodded, her pulse steadying with the momentum of confrontation. "Yes. Several individuals have come forward, risking their positions to ensure the truth sees light. They are here today." Whistleblowers rose one by one, their faces taut with courage and the lingering fear of reprisal. Their voices, when they spoke, were steady but laced with the tension of untold truths finally finding an audience. Each account reinforced the pattern Euphémie had laid bare, each corroboration a spark that ignited the collective conscience of the room. As the hours stretched, the confrontation sharpened. Officials attempted deflection, questioning minor discrepancies, testing the credibility of every claim. Euphémie met each attempt with calm precision, never allowing frustration to fracture her composure. She had anticipated every maneuver, prepared for every distraction. And then, at a pivotal moment, a senior official, whose authority had often loomed like an insurmountable wall, leaned forward, eyes glinting with a mixture of resignation and admission. "You're correct," he said finally, voice measured but carrying the gravity of confession. "There were failures. And in failing, we bear responsibility." The word struck like a bell in the room. Relief surged through Euphémie, but it was tempered by the knowledge that acknowledgement alone was not enough. It was the first step in a chain that could finally lead to accountability, reform, and justice. The room seemed to exhale collectively, tension giving way to a fragile but undeniable momentum. With each revelation, the hearing transformed from a defensive trial into a reckoning. The officials could no longer hide behind procedure or bureaucracy. The evidence was irrefutable, the testimonies vivid, and the moral imperative unmistakable. Reforms that had long been whispered about in the hallways of the institution now began to take tangible shape, with commitments from decision-makers to review protocols, implement oversight, and protect those who raised concerns in good faith. Euphémie allowed herself a small, private moment of triumph as she watched the ripples of her persistence unfold. It had been a lonely, punishing road, but the collision of truths, her evidence, the whistleblowers, the system forced to confront itself, had shifted the balance. Heroic twists emerged not as fairy tale magic but as the hard-won result of courage, meticulous preparation, and unyielding determination. Her daughter, seated quietly at the back, met her gaze with wide, awed eyes. It was a look that spoke of inherited strength, of admiration tempered with understanding of the stakes involved. Euphémie's ally, standing beside her, offered a subtle nod, a shared acknowledgement that they had navigated the storm together, and that their collective action had made the impossible tangible. As the hearing drew to its formal close, the senior official who had admitted failure addressed the room. "Let this be a moment not of shame alone, but of accountability. We have been confronted with the consequences of inaction and must now act to correct them. Procedures will be revised, and protections for whistleblowers will be strengthened. We owe it to those who were lost and to those who remain." Relief washed over Euphémie in waves, mingling with a quiet triumph. The air, once thick with tension, now seemed to shimmer with possibility. She had not only survived the trial of exposure but had catalyzed a movement toward justice that extended beyond her personal struggle. The shattering of silences had created resonance, a ripple effect that promised to endure long after the room emptied and the storm outside subsided. Stepping outside into the fresh air, Euphémie felt the wind against her face, carrying the scent of rain and renewal. She closed her eyes briefly, letting the sensation anchor her. The cliffs below, once symbols of isolation and turmoil, now seemed like guardians of a new dawn. Each decision she had made, every risk undertaken, had coalesced into this moment of vindication. And yet, she understood that this was not the end, it was the beginning of accountability, a process that would require vigilance, persistence, and unwavering moral clarity. In her gray eyes now burned a quiet fire, tempered by experience and sharpened by truth. Courage had not been the absence of fear, but the refusal to let fear dictate action. Defiance had not been reckless, but a disciplined insistence on justice. And through it all, bonds had been forged, between herself, her daughter, her ally, and those who had chosen integrity over silence. The hearing room, now behind her, had become more than a place of confrontation. It was a crucible in which the unbreakable threads of commitment, resilience, and moral courage had been tested, and had endured. Euphémie knew the road ahead would not be free of challenges. The system could resist, individuals could obstruct, and backlash could rise in waves. But the collision of truths had set a precedent, one that could not be erased. She had illuminated the path, and now others could follow, guided by the courage she had summoned from the depths of despair. As she walked along the rain-slicked pavement outside the courthouse, her thoughts were already turning to the next steps, ensuring reforms were implemented, supporting the whistleblowers who had risked everything, and maintaining the momentum of change. The fight was far from over, but the tide had turned. Accountability had begun, and in its wake, hope flickered defiantly, refusing to be extinguished. For Euphémie, this collision of truths was more than victory, it was affirmation. A testament to the power of courage, collaboration, and persistence. And though the echoes of the hearing would fade in time, the bonds forged in pursuit of justice, the sparks of defiance and integrity, would endure. And for those who felt the gravity of her struggle, who had followed her path through shadowed corridors and storm-lashed cliffs, there was a call implicit in every revelation, that justice, however delayed, could be achieved, and that silence, once shattered, could never fully return. Years had passed since the storm-lashed hearings, since the night Euphémie had sent the files that forced accountability and illuminated the systemic failures that had haunted her. Now, sunlight poured through the wide glass windows of the revamped dispatch center, golden and warm, scattering across polished floors and gleaming equipment. It was a far cry from the sterile, tension-filled room she had once endured. Every beam of light seemed to carry the weight of triumph, of lives preserved, and of lessons carved into memory by courage and perseverance. Euphémie moved through the center with a calm authority that only came from experience tempered by trials. The dispatchers, once wary of error and uncertainty, now followed protocols she had meticulously rewritten, each step designed to prevent the tragedies she had once confronted. Her reforms were more than procedural, they were cultural, fostering vigilance, accountability, and mutual care. She paused near a training module, observing a young recruit absorb the instructions with the intensity she remembered feeling as a novice. In that moment, Euphémie felt a quiet satisfaction. The ripple of her actions had reached a new generation, and the cycle of preventable loss had been disrupted. Her gray eyes lingered on a wall-mounted display, showcasing statistics of near misses that had been avoided since her reforms were implemented. Each number was a silent testament to lives spared, a tangible measure of justice in motion. The enormity of the journey, from despair to defiance, from isolation to collaboration, settled over her like a cloak of quiet pride. She had once believed her efforts might be futile, that the system's inertia was an immovable monolith. Yet here it was, evolving, fortified by the frameworks she had fought to embed, proof that change was not only possible but enduring. The personal victories that paralleled the professional ones were equally profound. Her daughter had returned, the bond between them mended by time, understanding, and shared resilience. Their relationship was no longer defined by absence or fear but by trust and open communication. Together, they walked through the halls of the dispatch center during a routine inspection, laughter echoing lightly as her daughter pointed out innovations she had learned about in school, already curious about operational excellence. The sight filled Euphémie with a profound sense of continuity. the next generation would inherit systems strengthened not only by design but by the lived experiences of those who had confronted the cost of negligence firsthand. Her ally, whose unwavering support had once been a quiet anchor through turbulent times, had become her partner in both life and mission. Their connection, forged in the crucible of shared trials, had blossomed into a love that was resilient, patient, and profoundly rooted in respect. Together, they now oversaw initiatives, guided trainings, and strategized reforms, blending operational oversight with mentorship and care. It was a partnership born not of convenience, but of shared purpose, a testament to the truth that endurance and collaboration could yield unexpected joy even after harrowing struggle. Euphémie's daily routine now included mentoring sessions, workshops, and evaluations, each interaction a chance to reinforce the principles she had fought to instill. She observed staff navigating simulations designed to replicate high-pressure crises, noting not only procedural accuracy but the subtle cultivation of judgment and ethical responsibility. Her presence in the center was both practical and symbolic. She was a living embodiment of what vigilance, courage, and moral clarity could achieve. And she found joy in small victories, the confident nod of a dispatcher who had successfully averted a potential disaster, the laughter shared in a brief respite from tension, the spark of understanding in someone who had grasped the deeper significance of their role. Though her life had transformed, the shadows of past guilt had not disappeared, they had been reshaped. What was once haunting remorse over her brother's loss had become purpose, a guiding force that informed every decision, every protocol, every interaction. Guilt had been alchemized into vigilance, empathy, and a commitment to ensure that no preventable tragedy would again be met with bureaucratic indifference. Each day at the dispatch center was both tribute and resolution, a way to honor those lost and to protect those who might otherwise be endangered. Outside, the cliffs and the waves that had once seemed merciless now felt like companions rather than threats. Euphémie often walked along the path overlooking the sea, reflecting on the long journey that had brought her here. The wind carried the scent of salt and renewal, and the sunlight glinting off the water mirrored the hope she now carried in her heart. She had learned that storms, internal and external, were not always signs of ruin but could be catalysts for resilience, for insight, for transformation. And she had become a beacon in that understanding, not only for herself but for the network of people who now thrived under her guidance. Her days were balanced, purposeful, and alive with small joys that contrasted starkly with the isolation and despair of the past. She read letters from whistleblowers who had followed her example, grateful for the protections and recognition her reforms had created. Families of lives spared reached out, offering quiet thanks that resonated deeper than any accolade. Each note, each message, each smile in the halls was a reminder that her defiance had ripple effects, creating waves of accountability and compassion that extended far beyond the walls of the dispatch center. As she concluded a training session, Euphémie paused at the window, sunlight spilling over her shoulders. Her gray eyes reflected a spectrum of emotions, pride, relief, gratitude, and a quiet, enduring hope. She had journeyed from haunted guardian to mentor, from desperate whistleblower to architect of systemic reform. The transformation was neither sudden nor easy, but it was undeniable. Systems had been fortified, human lives safeguarded, and the bonds she had feared lost were restored and deepened. Her gaze lingered on the horizon, the expanse of sea and sky mingling in the morning light. It was a dawn not only in the literal sense but in the metaphorical, an emblem of renewal, resilience, and hope. Every lesson learned, every risk undertaken, every act of courage had converged to create a world that was safer, more accountable, and brimming with potential. She understood, deeply, that this was not merely a personal victory but a collective triumph, a demonstration of what could be achieved when moral courage met practical action. Euphémie turned from the window and walked through the bustling halls, her presence commanding yet gentle, observing the energy of people who now understood that their vigilance mattered. Her daughter waved from a control station, eyes bright and laughing, and her partner caught her gaze from across the room, a subtle nod of shared satisfaction passing between them. The center was alive with purpose, and she was at the heart of it, a lighthouse for the lives it touched, the protocols it safeguarded, and the hope it represented. And in that quiet, golden light, Euphémie allowed herself to finally feel whole. She had confronted despair, faced corruption and negligence, rallied allies, and transformed guilt into purpose. The dawn of reform was not a fleeting moment, it was a legacy. Hope endured, radiant and persistent, illuminating not only the dispatch center but every life her actions had touched. For those who had followed her journey, from the cliffs of despair to the courtroom of reckoning, from the storm-lashed nights to this sunlit morning, the message was clear: courage, persistence, and collaboration could reshape even the most unyielding systems. And in that transformation, in that careful nurturing of change, lay the enduring power of defiant hope.